Hello everyone, welcome back to Bajirao IAS Academy. We have been discussing important current affairs topics every day. So today also we have some more important topics. They are very important for your prelims and mains examination. And the first topic with which we are going to start this discussion is about the delimitation. So the delimitation exercise and why the southern states are particularly objecting for this delimitation exercise. So we'll try to understand this in a very detailed manner, because recently the opposition ruled states chief ministers met in Chennai, so under the leadership of Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin, and they have discussed about the ill effects of this delimitation on the southern states, because the delimitation exercise that is going to be carried out based on the recent census after 2026 will have a negative impact on the southern states that have performed better when it compared to the northern states with respect to the control of population, right? So those southern states have been arguing that it will lead to the disincentivization of the southern states for their performance with respect to controlling the population. But on the other hand, the delimitation exercise will lead to increased number of seats for the northern states which have not performed better in terms of controlling the population growth rates. Now first of all, we'll understand what is a delimitation exercise, and then we'll go on to discuss this particular topic. Now what exactly is a delimitation exercise? So in a very simple words, a delimitation is a redrawing of boundaries of the constituencies for state legislative assemblies as well as the Lok Sabha constituencies. So I hope you knew about this, because once in every 5 years state legislative assembly elections and also general elections takes place, right? So in these elections there are constituencies. These constituencies are already decided by the delimitation commission based on the population as well as equal representation in each constituency. So that is what is called as the delimitation exercise carried out by the delimitation commission. So delimitation, in a very simple terms, this is a process of redrawing boundaries, right? So this is just a simple process of redrawing boundaries, and that is what is called as a delimitation exercise. And in fact, for this particular purpose, for redrawing boundaries all across the country for state legislative assembly as well as Lok Sabha constituencies, a delimitation commission will be established by the government. For that purpose, a delimitation act will be passed by the parliament, and after this delimitation act, the government will establish the delimitation commission under the chairmanship of a judge of the Supreme Court. So I hope it is very clear. So this delimitation commission, this will be established after every census. It will redraw the boundaries of state legislative assemblies as well as the Lok Sabha constituencies all across the country, right? So I hope you have understood what is a delimitation exercise. It is the process of redrawing the boundaries of the constituencies for state legislative assembly elections as well as elections for the Lok Sabha. And who will redraw the boundaries? A delimitation commission will redraw the boundaries of states all across the country for the Lok Sabha elections, right? So in this process of delimitation, the number of seats are being allocated to different states in the Lok Sabha or in the state legislative assembly. And in fact, it also reserves assembly seats for the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes in accordance with the constitution. So this is what the delimitation commission, this is the task of the delimitation commission. This particular task that this delimitation commission will perform, and we will understand the constitutional sanction behind the delimitation commission as well going ahead into the lecture. So it is very clear for you, right? So the opposition ruled chief ministers have recently met in Chennai under the leadership of Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M.K. Stalin, and they have discussed the negative impact of the delimitation exercise on the southern states, because southern states almost achieved the population stability, right? So they have almost achieved the population stability, and their population growth rate is less than the average total fertility rate of the country. Now in this context, the southern states have raised a lot of objections for the delimitation exercise, and we'll try to understand this in a very detailed manner. So if you get into this, the author has been explaining us that the democratic nations are actually governed by our public representatives. So we elect the public representatives, and public representatives make laws on behalf of us, right? So this is what a representative democracy look like. So India is a representative democracy because we don't directly make laws, we don't directly make the policies, we elect the representatives through elections, and the representatives on behalf of us, they make rules and laws. And in fact, in India, we have a universal adult franchise. So universal adult franchise essentially means that everyone who is above 18 years of age are eligible to cast their vote irrespective of any caste, race, language, region, any such distinctions. Everyone who is above 18 years of age, so they can actually cast their vote. And in fact, India is the largest democracy in the world with around 142 crore people, right? So therefore, in this context, right, public representatives play a very important role. People elect these public representatives, and these public representatives make laws and policies on behalf of the people. And when you look into the constitutional sanction of the Delimitation Commission, the constitutional sanction has been provided by Article 82 of the Constitution as well as Article 170 of the Indian Constitution. So what exactly Article 82 of the Constitution says? So this says that the Parliament enacts a Delimitation Act after every census. So census are conducted once in a 10 years, and after every census, Article 82 empowers the Parliament to constitute a Delimitation Commission. And in fact, once the act is in force, the union government sets up the Delimitation Commission. So similarly, Article 170 of the Indian Constitution says that the states also get divided into territorial constituencies after every census once in a 5 years. So for the Delimitation Commission, Article 182 as well as Article 170 provided the constitutional sanction, right? So the Delimitation Commission will be established by the government after the Parliament passing the Delimitation Act after every census. And in fact, the process also empowers the Parliament to constitute a Delimitation Commission. So in fact, after Parliament passes such a Delimitation Act, the government will constitute a Delimitation Commission after passing a Delimitation Act after every census. And similarly, so this Delimitation Commission will be headed by the judge of the Supreme Court, right? So this will be headed by the judge of the Supreme Court. So you just have to remember this. Judge of the Supreme Court heads this Delimitation Commission, right? So what is the purpose of the Delimitation Commission? So it redraw the boundaries or the territorial constituencies of the Lok Sabha seats as well as the state legislative assembly. However, this Delimitation Commission follows one single principle, that is one citizen, one vote and one value. One citizen, one vote and one value. So this is the principle that they follow when they are redrawing the boundaries of the territorial constituencies. However, so far the Delimitation Commission has conducted this exercise in the year 1951, 1961 and 1971 as well, and even 2002 as well, right? So the Delimitation Commission has conducted the delimitation so far 4 times, and it was established in 4 times after census, and in fact it adjusted the number of seats and the boundaries of the constituencies, and for that particular purpose this Delimitation Commission has been established. However, the problem is that after every Delimitation Commission, after every census once in a 10 years, a delimitation exercise needs to be carried out, and in fact the delimitation or a number of constituencies would be divided based on population. population. Please carefully understand this. For example, imagine that if India's population is 80 crore, and after 10 years if India's population increases to 100 crore, so in order to cater to the increased number of population, we need to increase the seats, we need to increase the number of seats in the Lok Sabha. We will have more number of constituencies because this delimitation exercise is carried out based on the principle of one citizen, one voter and one value. And because of that reason, since we increase the number of seats, for example, imagine the case of states like Uttar Pradesh and also states like Bihar. Imagine that by 2010 these states have for example, Uttar Pradesh by 2010, an imaginary number. So if it has a 10 crore population, if it has 10 crore population by 2021, by 2021, Uttar Pradesh would have a 18 crore population, 18 crore population. Now, there is a significant increase in the population in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Right, so because of that reason, there is a high probability that the number of seats, in case a delimitation commission has been constituted to redraw the boundaries of the Lok Sabha seats, then the number of seats for the state of Uttar Pradesh will certainly increase. And if more number of population or population growth has been reported in particular states, then those states will actually get more number of seats, they will get more number of seats. So more number of seats means more representation for those seats in the parliament. But imagine the other case, that the southern states which have performed better in terms of controlling the population. So controlling the population in the sense that they have reported the negative growth rate of population, right? So compared to 2010 levels, in 2021, population in most of the southern states substantially declined. Because of the declined population, the southern states will get a less number of seats in the parliament compared to their North Indian counterparts. And that is where the southern Indian states are, southern Indian states are strongly raising objections about the delimitation exercise, because they have performed better in terms of controlling the population. But since they have performed better, then the in case this delimitation exercise is carried out, then it will lead to the reduced representation of the southern Indian states in the parliament. But on the other hand, the states like UP and Bihar, despite not making any efforts to control population growth rates, they are getting more representation in the parliament. So it is certainly a disincentive on the part of the southern Indian states and an incentive on the part of the northern Indian states, despite not taking up any measures to control the population. So that's where the southern Indian states have been raising objections. So keeping this particular aspect in mind, what happened was, when Srimati Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister, so 42nd Constitutional Amendment was passed by the Parliament. 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act has been passed by the Parliament. So this 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act has actually froze the number of seats in the Lok Sabha. Right, so this 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act has actually froze the number of seats in the Lok Sabha. So there will be no increase in the number of seats in the Lok Sabha for these different states. So that is what the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act has actually said. So this is to control the population, right? For a country like India, controlling population is very, very important. So if we don't control the population, it will result in extreme stress and pressure on the existing or scarce resources, and it will also result in limited capacity of the government to provide essential services to the public, because of the less number of resources but more population, right? So because of that particular reason, in order to control the population, Srimati Indira Gandhi government, it has passed the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, and it has actually froze the total number of seats in the Lok Sabha. So however, what happened was, after this 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, again 84th Constitutional Amendment Act has been passed by the Parliament. Right, so this 84th Constitutional Amendment Act passed by the Parliament in the year 2002, again it froze the same number. Right, again it has not increased the number of seats in the Lok Sabha despite the delimitation exercise was carried out. However, the limit imposed, the number of seats froze in the Lok Sabha by the 84th Constitutional Amendment Act till 2026. Right, so after 2026 this limit is going to expire, and there is a need to conduct a delimitation exercise. And in fact, center is also thinking to increase the number of seats by redrawing the boundaries again based on the population. Right, so after 2026, next year, the central government has been planning to redraw the boundaries all across the country based on the census of 2021. So if we get the census data, the center will decide to go ahead with the delimitation exercise, redrawing the boundaries, and that's where the southern Indian states are coming into the picture, and they are opposing this delimitation exercise. So if this delimitation exercise is carried out, then it would certainly disincentivize the southern Indian states, and it also leads to the lesser representation for the southern Indian states. And that's why the southern Indian states are asking the central government to again pass a Constitutional Amendment Act and again froze the number of seats in the Lok Sabha. Right, so at least for a next 25 years there is a need to freeze the number of seats in the Lok Sabha, thereby the existing status quo can be maintained and there will be no increase in the number of seats in the Lok Sabha. So however, if center go ahead and it carried out the delimitation exercise, so it is expected that the estimated number of total seats would be 846 plus 2. So this is the estimated number of total seats in the Lok Sabha if center goes ahead with the delimitation exercise. And that's why a new parliament building has also been constructed by the center, and this new parliament building have all the facilities to accommodate in case a delimitation exercise is carried out and more number of seats, a number of parliamentarians increased, then also this new parliament building can accommodate those many number of parliamentarians. Right, so this is actually the issue, and I hope you have understood the issue. And let's look into the fertility rates of southern Indian states and northern Indian states, and why the southern Indian states are particularly concerned about the delimitation exercise. Because see, most of the south Indian states have expressed the fears. So what is their main fear that they have been expressing is that in case this delimitation exercise is carried out based on the population, so population as a criteria, the center go ahead and it establishes a delimitation commission, and this delimitation commission redraws the boundaries of the constituencies based on the population, then the representation of the southern Indian states will particularly decline. Right, because see, as of now, most of the southern Indian states, if you look at their fertility, so their fertility, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, their fertility rate is 1.5. So their total fertility, so it is called as TFR, and their total fertility rate is 1.5. And Kerala and Karnataka, for states like Kerala and Karnataka, their fertility rate is 1.6. and Tamil Nadu has the lowest fertility rate of 1.4. Right, so I hope you know the definition of the total fertility rate. So in fact, in UPSC prelims examination also it was once asked, so what exactly is a total fertility rate? So total fertility rate is average number of children a mother can give a birth to in her lifetime. So that is the total fertility rate. And in fact, the average fertility rate replacement level fertility rate in India is 2.1, right? So replacement level fertility rate is 2.1, but most of the southern Indian states have fertility rates lesser than the replacement level fertility rate. Now, what is the replacement level fertility rate? So imaginary number, take an imaginary population. For example, a particular country have a population of around 100 crore, right? So they have a population of 100 crore, and then the total fertility or replacement level fertility rate is that, whoever is whoever is newly born, right? So the birth rate is equal to the death rate in that particular country. The birth rate is equal to death rate, and that is what is called as the replacement level fertility rate. So I hope it is very, very clear. And in India, the replacement level fertility rate is 2.1, but most of the southern Indian states are already having the fertility rate lesser than the replacement level fertility rates in India. But compared to the southern Indian states, if you look into the fertility rates of the northern Indian states, so most of the northern Indian states, for example, states like Bihar, so they have the fertility rate of more than 3, right? So they have a fertility rate of more than 3, and even UP, for that matter, it also has a fertility rate of more than 2.5. So since the population has increased a lot in recent times, so if the center establishes a delimitation commission, and the delimitation exercise is also carried out purely based on the population, it would certainly incentivizes the northern Indian states because they have more population, and it disincentivizes the southern Indian states because they have a lesser population, because the southern Indian states have performed better in terms of their demography, in terms of their demographic performance as well. So remember that 15th Finance Commission terms of reference as well. So population was taken as a criteria. Population is always taken as a criteria, but the thing is that 2011 census were taken as a criteria to distribute funds by the 15th Finance Commission, and this was also strongly objected by the southern Indian states. So after there was a strong objection from the southern Indian states about the terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission, the center has also included demographic performance, as a criteria. Demographic performance as a criteria for the devolution of funds. So that's why these southern Indian states again raising objections about this delimitation exercise, because it would certainly going to benefit the northern Indian states, and it would certainly punish the southern Indian states for whatever progress that they have achieved in terms of controlling the population, right? So however, if we look at the solutions, the southern Indian states have been demanding that this delimitation exercise should not be carried out. And in fact, even if the delimitation exercise is carried out, so there should be another constitutional amendment act, and this constitutional amendment act should freeze the number of seats in the Lok Sabha for another 25 years. After that, the population stability could be achieved, and there will be more equitable representation, and there will be no injustice to the southern Indian states. So this is what the southern Indian states have been asking the central government. And apart from that, when delimitation commission, if it is established by the central government, so the central government should not take population as a sole criteria for the delimitation exercise. So population should not be the only sole criteria, because it will be considered as injustice on the part of the southern Indian states, and it will also significantly reduce the representation of the southern Indian states in the parliament. So this is what their key objection was when it comes to the delimitation commission and delimitation exercise. So I hope you have understood this. Now you can also see here that in case the delimitation exercise is carried out, so you can see that Tamil Nadu as of now having 39 seats, but if delimitation exercise is carried out, its seats are going to increase 49, right? So 10 more seats it will get. But on the other hand, if you look at states like Bihar, as of now it is having 40 seats, and if delimitation exercise is carried out based on recent population census, its total number of seats is going to double in the sense that it is going to get around 79 seats. But on the other hand, so if you can look at states like Uttar Pradesh, so as of now it is having 80 seats in the Lok Sabha, and again it is going to get 143. So there is a huge increase in number of seats for the states like Bihar, for the states like Uttar Pradesh. But on the other hand, if you look at states like Tamil Nadu, they are hardly getting 10 more seats. So that's why they are raising these serious objections about the delimitation exercise. However, it is up to the central government, it is up to the different political parties and also different stakeholders to build a consensus on this delimitation exercise, and that is the need of the hour. So the next important topic is that recently the Supreme Court has held that free speech is an integral part of a healthy society. And in fact, in recent times, it is very often in news that the free speech, free speech has been curtailed. Government has been imposing some restrictions on the free speech. But in this backdrop, the Supreme Court has actually made some important remarks on free speech. So we'll try to understand what are those important remarks that the Supreme Court has made with respect to free speech. Right, the Supreme Court has recently held that the fundamental right to free speech, which is enshrined in Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. So Article 19 of the Indian Constitution, freedom of speech and expression, the Supreme Court has held that the fundamental right to free speech through poetry, theatre, stand-up comedy and satire must be cherished. So this is what the remark made by the Supreme Court, right? So the Supreme Court has also quashed a criminal case accusing Congress MP Imran Pratap Gadi of inciting discord through his poem Suffering Injustice with Love. So he is actually Imran Pratap Gadi, and he actually expressed his views through a poem called Suffering Injustice with Love, and after that a criminal case was filed against him for inciting violence. However, the Supreme Court has quashed a case against Imran Pratap Gadi, and the Supreme Court has also made a remark that the fundamental right to free speech through poetry, theatre, stand-up comedy and satire must be cherished, right? So upholding the right to free speech by the Supreme Court. And in fact, when we talk about a free speech, so free speech is very essential and very important. This is important for any democratic country, particularly a functional democratic country like India. So the essence of free speech is its ability to think, its ability to freely speak and obtain the information from others through publications, public discourse without any fear, retribution, restrictions or repressions by the government, right? So this is actually the essence of the free speech. So whatever you speak, so whatever you think, so that should not be restricted. So there should not be any fear that the government will restrict you if you speak. Yes, of course there are limits, right? So of course there are limits, but if you say something, if you speak something, if you think something within the limits, and if you still have the fear that the government will curtail, government will restrict, so that is what should be avoided, that is what should be eliminated, and this is actually the essence of the free speech. And in fact, Article 19 clause 1 and subclause 1 of the Indian Constitution, it clearly states that all citizens shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression. So all citizens have the right to freedom of speech and expression, and this is clearly mentioned in Article 19 clause 1 and subclause A. However, the philosophy behind this particular article lies in the preamble of the Indian Constitution. And in fact, in the preamble of the Indian Constitution, it is clearly mentioned that a solemn resolve made to secure all its citizens liberty of thought and expression, right? So this is what has been clearly mentioned in the preamble. So if you look at the preamble, it has been clearly mentioned the liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship. The government should not curtail, the government should not impose restrictions on free speech of individuals. So however, what is the significance of free speech? So let's try to understand this. So why free speech is very important? So firstly, free speech is aligned with the democratic values of any society or any country, because freedom of speech is very often considered as a bulwark of any democratic government, particularly true with respect to a democratic country like India. And in fact, the freedom is essential for the proper functioning of democratic process and proper functioning of a democratic country like India, where we have a constitutionally guaranteed fundamental rights. And in fact, citizens can criticize the government, and it is very important to bring government to make the government more and more accountable to the people. And in fact, people can criticize the government policies and government actions, and that is the essence of democracy. And in fact, the freedom of speech actually ensure pluralism, right? So India is a plural democracy, right? So for freedom of speech and expression, so it further enriches pluralism principle in India, because freedom of speech actually reflects and also reinforces the principle of pluralism, thereby ensuring that the diversity is validated, and it also promotes the self-esteem of those who follow a particular lifestyle. And similarly, free speech is considered as an integral aspect of each individual's right to self-development and also fulfillment of his conditions. Thereby, restrictions would inhibit our personality as well as our growth. Now, in this context, the Supreme Court has actually made some important remarks. So the 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court anonymous view was that state was duty bound to protect the right to life that is enshrined in Article 21 of the Indian Constitution whenever there is a threat from any quarter, including the private persons as well. And in fact, the Supreme Court has also said that majority verdict of the Supreme Court has also said that the fundamental right to free speech enshrined in Article 19(1) and Clause 1, the fundamental right to free speech and life can be enforced against private persons as well, other than the state or its instrumentalities. Right. So in fact, one of the judges of the Supreme Court, Justice P.V. Nagaratna, has held that Article 19(1) Clause 1 right to free speech serves as a vehicle through which dissent can be expressed. Right. So this is actually a vehicle and through which dissent can be expressed, government can be criticized, and the right to dissent, disagree and adopt varying and individualistic points view inheres in every citizen of this country. So this is a very important remark that has been made by the judge of the Supreme Court. However, there are number of cases where the Supreme Court has strongly upheld the right to freedom of speech and expression. The first case is Romesh Thapar versus State of Madras case 1950. So in this particular case, the Supreme Court has observed that freedom of press lays at the foundation of all democratic organizations. And in fact, the freedom of press is also a very important component of Article 19, Clause 1 and A, freedom of speech. And in fact, another case, that is Benete Coleman and Co versus Union of India 1972. So in this particular case, the Supreme Court has struck down the validity of a newsprint control order with a fixed maximum number of pages. Right. So a particular newsprint should have only this many number of pages. However, in this particular case, the Supreme Court has held that it violates this particular This is a restriction imposed by the government on freedom of speech and expression under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A of the Indian Constitution, and it is a not reasonable restriction under 19, Clause 2 of the Constitution of India. So this is what the Supreme Court has held in Benedict Coleman and Union of India case. So similarly, the third case was Menaka Gandhi versus Union of India case 1978, and in this particular case the Supreme Court has held that freedom of speech and expression under Article 19, Clause 1 and Subclause A is not confined to the national boundaries. Right, freedom of speech and expression is not confined to national boundaries. So however, as of now, the Supreme Court has recognized the following things are part of the freedom of speech and expression. They are the right to propagate one's views as well as the views of others, and freedom of press, right against bans called by the political party or any other organization. This is also forms part of Article 19 of the Indian Constitution, and freedom of commercial advertisement, right to telecast. Government has no monopoly on the electronic media, right to know about government activities, freedom of silence, and right against tapping of telephonic conversations, and right against imposition of pre-censorship on newspapers, right to demonstrate or picketing but not right to strike, right to access information via internet, right of filmmakers to exhibit their films, and Raj Narayan versus State of UP case, the Supreme Court has again stated that right to information is a fundamental right under Article 19. So this is very important judgment of the Supreme Court. So in Raj Narayan versus State of UP case, in this particular case, the Supreme Court has held that right to information is a fundamental right under Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. And the next important article is that we all knew that Myanmar and also Thailand are hit by a severe 7.7 magnitude earthquake, and it has resulted in a massive destruction in these two countries, and minor tremors are also felt in northeastern part of India and India as well. So therefore, in this context, we'll be discussing about the massive earthquake that hits Myanmar, Thailand. What is the main reason for such a massive earthquake? So we'll be understanding about that. So we knew that it is in news that a powerful 7.7 magnitude earthquake struck Myanmar, right? So it also struck the Thailand, right? So in fact, the epicenter of this particular earthquake is at Mandalay, and Mandalay is country's second largest city. And what are the basic causes of the earthquake in Myanmar? So we'll try to understand some basic causes of earthquake in Myanmar. So understand one thing, that this Myanmar, right? So Myanmar is located somewhere here. So this Myanmar is situated between the Indian plate. So this is the Indian plate, and after Indian plate, this is the Eurasian plate, right? So this is Indian plate and this is Eurasian plate, and Myanmar is actually located between the Indian plate and the Eurasian plate, right? So this location of Myanmar is actually between the Indian plate and Myanmar plate. So because of this particular reason, Myanmar is actually located in a very seismically active area, right? So it is located in a very seismically active area because it is located between Indian plate and the Eurasian plate. So Indian plate moves northwards beneath the Eurasian plate, right? So in fact, the Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate, and that's why here the Himalayas are actually formed. And in fact, the Siang fault, so this Siang fault has actually been running from north to south through Myanmar. So imagine that if it is the Myanmar, so it has been running north to south through the Myanmar. So this Siang fault, since it is running from north to south in the Myanmar, it actually marks the boundary between the Indian plate as well as the Eurasian plate, right? So this particular Siang fault is considered as the boundary between the Indian plate as well as the European plates. Remember, we have just discussed that Myanmar is located at a boundary between the Indian plate and the Eurasian plate, and this boundary is called as Siang fault. And this Siang fault is an active fault, and it has caused significantly severe and most powerful earthquakes in the past also, right? So since it is a boundary and this fault has already caused powerful earthquakes in the past also. For example, a 7.9 magnitude earthquake was caused in 1912, and a 6.9 magnitude earthquake again caused in 2016 as well, right? So here you can see this is what is called as Siang fault, and this particular fault is located between the Indian plate and Eurasian plate. So this is the boundary between the Indian plate and Eurasian plate, and this is what is called as the Siang fault that you can see here. So this is all the Siang fault that runs from north to south in Myanmar. And in fact, we have just understood that this Indian plate moving northward along the Siang plate, right? So Indian plate is actually moving northward beneath the Eurasian plate along with the Siang plate relative to the Eurasian plate, right? So this is what is called as Eurasian plate, and this is Indian plate, and Indian plate actually moves northwards relative to the Eurasian plate, and the Siang the Siang fault also moves northwards. However, because of this gradual movement, what happens was a friction and stress build up along this fault, right? So over the years, friction and stress built up around this fault line, and this has led to a sudden release of energy, and this sudden release of energy caused a massive earthquake in Myanmar, and that has claimed lives of thousands of people. And in fact, the epicenter of earthquake was located 17.2 kilometers from Mandalay. So you can see here, this is Mandalay, and so it is reported just 17.2 kilometers from Mandalay, and this is Myanmar's second largest city at a depth of 10 kilometers. Right? So this is Myanmar's second largest city at a depth of just 10 kilometers. And in fact, the shallow earthquakes are more destructive. Shallow earthquakes in the sense that we have a core, crust, mantle and core, and within crust, so there are some deeper earthquakes that have epicenter in deep deeper parts of the crust, and there are some earthquakes which originate at the comparatively less depths. Their epicenter would have comparatively lesser depth, and these earthquakes are called as shallow earthquakes, right? So these earthquakes are called as shallow earthquakes, and in fact these shallow earthquakes actually have they are actually more destructive, right? Because the shallow earthquakes, so they are less than 70 kilometer deep. Shallow earthquakes are less than 70 kilometers are deep, so they cause intense shaking. For example, Myanmar's earthquake occurred at 10 kilometer, and this has been leading to a rapid and even forceful seismic waves, and even it has caused extensive damage as well, right? So in case if any earthquake it is shallow in nature, so that would be more and more destructive. And in fact, when we talk about the energy that will be released by these shallow earthquakes, so they actually release more energy in seismic waves, and thereby it will cause a stronger surface shaking as well as the greater destruction as well compared to deep earthquakes. And apart from that, the shallow earthquakes also have a very high intensity, and because they have a very high intensity, the ground shaking is also very high, and that would result in structural damages, collapsing of buildings, multi-story buildings, and greater damage compared to the deeper earthquakes where seismic waves lose energy by the time they reach to the surface. And in fact, The shallow earthquakes often even lead to more intense aftershocks as well, right? So that is a shaking of the ground even after a major earthquake has been reported, right? So it will further damage the already weakened structures. The Myanmar earthquake had aftershocks, including one with a magnitude of 6.4 magnitude, right? So in fact, if you look at this, so this is Mandalay and this is Siang fault. So this Siang fault is located between the Indian plate as well as the European plate. So firstly, the Indian plate moves northwards. So you can see here the Indian plate moves northwards, and here the Sunda tectonic plate, it actually shifts in the opposition direction 49 meters every year. So because of the opposite movements of two different tectonic plates, so what happens is that these two plates catch and stick on Siang fault, building up a huge amount of energy within this Siang fault. So once these plates slip past each other, that would actually release a huge amount of stored energy in a single burst, and that would cause a massive earthquakes like this with a very high and powerful magnitude. Now, in fact, whenever an earthquake has reported, earthquake usually takes place in two different waves. One is primary waves and second is the secondary waves. So primary waves are actually the first to arrive at the surface, and they are being called as the primary waves. However, the secondary waves arrive at surface with the time lag. So first it is primary waves, and after primary waves there is some time lag, and then the secondary waves would come. And in fact, the primary waves vibrate parallel to the direction of propagation of waves. For example, if wave is propagated in this direction, so they are just parallel. The primary waves are just parallel to the primary waves. However, the S waves vibrate perpendicular to the direction of propagation of waves. And in fact, primary waves are considered as a less destructive, but secondary waves are more and more destructive. And apart from that, the primary waves can travel through all mediums. They can travel solid, liquid, and all these mediums they can actually travel. But on the other hand, the S waves can travel only through the solids. They cannot travel through gas and liquids. And P waves are considered as a compressional waves, but the S waves causes displacement of rocks, collapse of structures. So the major damage is caused because of the earthquakes primarily by the S waves alone. So this is the basic difference between the primary waves and the secondary waves. And next topic is Operation Brahma. So after the 7.7 magnitude earthquake hit Myanmar, then the Indian government has actually started an operation called Operation Brahma to send relief material and to conduct rescue operations, right? Because with Myanmar, India has been sharing its borders, right? So therefore India is known as a first responder. Because of its responsibility as a first responder, India needs to launch such a massive operation to provide relief and rescue assistance to the Myanmar. And because of that particular reason, India has launched Operation Brahma, right? So India launched Operation Brahma, sending humanitarian aid and relief supplies to the affected region of Myanmar, right? So in fact, other similar operations that India has already conducted in the past, for example, recently Operation Maitri. So this is India's army-led rescue and relief mission in earthquake hit Nepal. And similarly Operation Vijay, so operation by the Indian army to flush out the Pakistani intruders from the Kargil sector. Operation Meghdut, Operation Blue Star, Operation Flood, Operation Blackboard, Operation Shakti. This is with respect to Pokhran test 1998. So these are very, very important, right? So very, very important for an objective type examination. So kindly go through all these different operations that government of India has conducted. Operation Reno is army action against United Liberation Front of Assam's insurgent group, right? So there are various such types of operations that the government of India has conducted previously. For example, Operation Ganga. So this is with respect to evacuation of students who have been stranded in Ukraine because of the Russia-Ukraine war. And Operation Devi Shakti. So Operation Devi Shakti to evacuate the hundreds of Indians from Afghanistan after Afghanistan was taken over by the Taliban regime, and Operation Vande Bharat during the COVID-19 pandemic to bring back the Indians from other countries that the government of India has conducted, and even Operation Samudra Setu. And this is actually a naval operation, like how Vande Bharat through flights Indians were brought back to India. Operation Samudra Setu was also conducted during the COVID-19 pandemic. Operation Rahat. So this is again to evacuate Indians from a conflict hit Yemen, and Operation Maitri that Indian government has conducted. So this is an operation that has been launched for a relief and rescue operation aftermath of Nepal earthquake, right? So over 5,000 Indians and 170 foreign nationals were brought back from Nepal after as part of the Operation Maitri after this Nepal earthquake in the year 2015. Right, so these are very important operations that India has conducted recent times. And the other important operation is when Turkey was hit by an earthquake with such a powerful magnitude, Indian government has conducted Operation Dost, right? So you have to remember all these different operations. And that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our class, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.